glimpses through the trees and vocals on the breeze.
It's come to my attention that I live right at the seat of power in the state of Vermont. I mean, I knew I lived right by Montpelier, the state capital, but it wasn't until the other night in episode 55 of Bigfoot Odyssey's Researchers Report that I was inspired by Mark Zaskey's account of what he was able to learn in the state capital of Florida, Tallahassee. So with the kind permission of Bigfoot Odyssey, I'm going to replay the relevant segments from the interview and tell you that for 2020, my plan is to try to make inroads, the same kind of inroads that Mark has been able to make here in my own state. I will, of course, document every step of this process and share it with you guys. My new nephew by marriage is the forester for one of the 14 counties in Vermont. He's not into Sasquatch at all, but I'm going to sit down with him and pick his brain as to how I might make some progress in finding out just what the mechanisms are behind the scenes here in Vermont that may parallel those that Mr. Zaskey has succeeded in digging up behind the scenes in Florida.
And in this particular meeting, I walked into an ambush with several individuals, field biologists that were in this room. And the first thing they said to me was, first of all, I want you to know that we all know who you are. And so I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? You know? And then the next thing he said was, and there's nothing you can show us that we can't explain. And that's what he said. And I said, well, that's good. You know, I'm hoping that you can help to explain a lot of things. And so we sat down and in this meeting for about 2.5 hours, maybe a little less than that. What I got from it was that there is indeed something going on. Now, subsequently to this meeting, I found documentation. I was presented with documentation would be the right way to say it. Incontrovertible evidence in the form of a transcript.
These documents that Mark has gained access to aren't going to be legible here on the screen. The font is too small. But they can be seen and downloaded in our Facebook group, Sasquatch and Civic Duty. Mark has said that he wants them distributed as far and wide as possible to try to break this thing wide open, at least from the standpoint of this one state capital.
From the House of Representatives in the state of Florida here, that there's a bill in place and has been since 1975, and that amendments were made to this bill by several different Florida senators, that including the name of the bill was changed and it's all documented in this transcript, that they have had a management program in place to manage these things, and that there's a bill that's been in place that the public is unaware of to protect these things. During the meeting, I was unaware of this. It wasn't until I went to Tallahassee for something with my wife, was being awarded for one of her accomplishments in the Capitol. And these gentlemen approached me and I'm like, what is going on? At first I thought, okay, well, the feds are here and they're going to finally pull me aside and tell me I need to stop, you know? And it turned out that it was a couple of officials from the state archive in Tallahassee, the historical archive. And they were willingly giving me this information about this bill and he was like, I've got something for you, it's going to freak you out, and I'm going to email it to you. And so that's what happened. But during this meeting with these biologists that essentially run the area known as no man's land, or what we used to call the island, these individuals demonstrated every type of irrational explanation for every single piece of evidence that I presented them with, while at the same time attempting to catch me in trespassing situations using a map on the wall. And they were up at the map. Well, have you ever been into this area over here? And I'm like, well, there's no trespassing signs, so we don't go in there. Have you ever been over here? And I'm like, well, there's no. And I'm like, listen, guys, if you think the existence of Sasquatch is laughable, what's all the resistance about? If I'm just some idiot with a camera, why do I feel like I'm on trial? Why are you dismissing everything that I'm trying to say and refusing to take a look at the physical evidence? I brought track casts with me. I brought DNA samples with me. I brought hair samples with me. I brought terabytes of visual data, including trackways with 600 to 700 tracks and 4 different individuals. And they were flat out refused to look at any of it, would not look at it. And I described what I had and weren't interested. I showed them one picture. 2 of them refused to comment on it. And the other guy said, well, I see something there. And I'm like, okay, what do you see? And he refused to comment. In the end, the boots on the ground guy got so mad at me at one point that the veins in his head started popping out, and he leaned forward with a dirty look on his face like he was going to come after me. Because I said, and I quote, and this is when he did that, he said it right after I said, well, they said, well, how are you doing this? And I said, well, several different ways. But when I go after him aggressively, and I didn't even get to finish my sentence, and this guy looked like he was going to explode on me, demonstrating emotional attachment to a situation that doesn't exist.
Right.
I mean, I read them like a book, and they were full of shit, Carrie. That's the bottom line. And so in the end, they were dismissive, and they tried to explain away things and really sounded more irrational than someone, trying to present actual physical evidence and all this stuff. Right. So I left there with a bad taste in my mouth, but at the same time, confirmation in several different areas. And so subsequently, receiving these documents from the state of Florida, it was the state of Florida who gave me these documents, okay? Essentially, representatives from the state of Florida sent these documents to me that conclusively show that several different senators in the state capitol in 1978 violated the Constitution and stated that they were all aware that that's what's happening. At the beginning, one of the first things that's stated in the transcript by one of the senators is, you do realize, all of you, that this bill flies in the face of the Constitution. And they're all in there understanding it fully. It's a 6-page document where authorities and the people that we put in charge of our lives, we vote them into office. It pisses me off to no end. Are actively lying to us to the extent that there literally is evidence in this transcript that there's a committee, a secret committee. They talk about it. At the end of this transcript, there's one more vote from another amendment. All of these senators involved in this transcript brought amendments to this bill that no one knows about. And they all voted on the various amendments to the bill. One section of the bill, one guy says, well, I think we ought to treat them like deer. And we should be able to kill the buck, but leave the females and the children alone. And they're talking about humanoids.
Right.
To which there's a negative response from the other senators. I mean, this is happening. You know what I mean? Or it happened anyway. But at the end, from what I gather from the document and the transcripts, there's a one last vote, and they don't vote publicly. They clearly state at the end that they're going to take that vote into the committee. Now, we all know there's several different types of committees, and they're assigned for different tasks. We have the Intelligence Committee in Congress. We have all this. The senators have the same thing. I honestly believe that and here's the thing, there's a sheriff present, and the actual amendment that they're voting on to institute has to do with law enforcement responding, I think, to panicked calls from people who have these things on their property. And it's called the Fresh Pursuit Clause. The Fresh Pursuit Clause. And I believe it has to do with the discharge of firearms at these humanoids and the elimination of liability for law enforcement in those particular situations where these individuals may show aggression. When they arrive on a scene, if that thing's still there and they have to, start shooting at it, there's no liability. Why would that be? Well, it's an amendment to an existing bill that protects them. Mm-hmm. So if they're protected, obviously, there are going to be situations, because they're real, and every potential type of interaction between humans and these relic hominoids has a potential of occurring. The law enforcement needs to have a lack of liability in that situation from the bill, because they made it a crime in 1975. I've looked for this bill night and day, cannot find it. I have statutes, and I'm in the process of researching the rest of them to find out what else I can find. But in looking at this, it completely correlates to that meeting I had here in Palm Beach County with the biologists. These people are fully aware and have been for 40 years, 42 years, at least 43 years, somewhere in there, to the extent that there is legal precedence on how to deal with these things. There are protective laws. I would have never done what I've done for 5 years had I known that there was already a law in place. You know, what kind of harm
nobody knows about?
Yeah, man. Yeah. And how are they getting away with this? There's one senator literally in the transcript asks about the congressional repercussions and ramifications of what they're doing. What we have in this country is we have our representatives. I mean, these people we put in office, and we're supposed to be able to trust these individuals to look out for our best interests. What this bill clearly shows is that not only are they all fully aware that it's unconstitutional what they're doing, because they're keeping it from us. That would be the only way it's unconstitutional, is if they're not telling us about it. And they're fully aware of that, and it's stated in the actual transcripts. But what it does is it clearly shows that there is an agenda behind the scenes, and that people like you, Daniela, and like me are the enemy. It justifies 9 times out of 10 the things that I've witnessed firsthand and the attitudes that I've gotten from law enforcement and the biologists in the meeting. They're not supposed to let anyone know what's going on. And this document confirms that that's the way it's structured from the top tier, the people who wrote the legislation, the people who are bringing amendments to the floor in the House of Representatives of the state of Florida in Tallahassee. You look at it now, and if they've had this management program since the late 70s, if it's in place, like I think it is, like we've documented over and over and over in countless ways, the preserves that are set up, the government preserves. The government is not supposed to be able to purchase land inside a county-owned wildlife management area. And yet, all over the state of Florida, we have something called the Pittman-Robertson Federal Management Aid Project. And those things come in, and they're structured legally so slick, so they can get away with it. Oh, well, we're just giving aid in these areas. Right, because that's what we need. We need federal aid in these areas. When the bottom line is all they got to do is put a fence in, put no trespassing, and leave it alone, and the area goes back to its natural state. Right, but when you go in these areas, you start seeing signs. No firearms, dwelling area. Dwelling area. We're in the middle of a 60,000 acre swamp. There are no homes and no one's allowed to live there. And yet we see signs that say dwelling area. This isn't habitat, as is the designation assigned to wild animals. We see dwelling area, which is it's a signal for human type of occupation.
Right.
So we've got all these pieces of this puzzle, 5 years of hell, and it's finally coming together to the point where at least I can document some of this for you guys and begin to get into it and show you. My thing is this, right? Like I said, had I known, would I have gone through all this? Would I have gone through this because I consider it to be a humanitarian issue? The existence of these guys out there, in my opinion, and based on what I've seen, is a severely lacking attention and proper oversight humanitarian issue. What could be more relevant to being human on planet Earth than there being another species of upright walking human type being?
They stood apart from us through the centuries, try to call them near and overcome our fear, but they only flee. Never fooled by trust, they're nothing if not free.